Now, the Urban Task Force represents Australia's most prominent property developers and equity financiers. It's claimed that by 2057, only 25% of dwellings across Sydney will be detached houses. You could say the same probably for Brisbane as well. In 2016, it was 55%. The number of apartments over the same period, they say, will climb from 30% to 50%. Duplexes and townhouses from 14% to 25%. But what's also changing is the way we build the freestanding homes. An Australian Bureau of Statistics report from admittedly 3 years ago revealed how new houses in Sydney were largely unchanged in size, but they're being built on significantly smaller blocks due to increased land costs, among other things. Leith Van Onselen is Chief Economist at Macro Business and joins us on the line now. G'day, Leith.
G'day, Bill. How are you?
Well, thanks. Now, look, I know you have a very strong underlying theory about this, but before we get on to that, and that is about population, I know there are other factors at play. The bricks and mortar side of things, a 2024 Productivity and Equality Commission in New South Wales report says many residential projects in Sydney were simply not feasible. Has property development really become so expensive?
Yeah, it has, unfortunately, Bill. So since the pandemic hit, construction costs have gone up by around 40%. So that's, 40% in around 5 years. And what that's basically done is it's made building homes a lot more expensive. And because it's more expensive, it's obviously crimped demand and made it less feasible for developers to build. At the same time, we've obviously got much higher interest rates, which also makes it, more expensive to purchase a property for a purchaser, but also to finance it. If you're a developer and you're relying on business finance. And of course, builders are also competing with state governments against their big build infrastructure projects. And that's obviously making it harder to find labour to build houses. And we've seen record numbers of builders go bankrupt in the last several years because of these sorts of issues. So effectively, if you've ever studied economics, anybody's listening, the supply curve shifted to the left from all these factors, and it means that it's now more expensive to build homes at any given price point, and it also means that we can build less homes than we could before because of these rising costs, labour shortages, higher interest rates, etc.
Now, according to Blacktown Council, I don't think anyone would dispute it, council's responsible for setting lot sizes for established areas, whereas New South Wales Government or any state government is responsible for setting lot sizes for recently developed areas. And they tend to be very small blocks. Are we becoming used to this now, given the stats that I've just quoted in the introduction?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's inevitable. So, Sydney's population has grown by about 1.5 million people this century so far. So since the Sydney Olympics, if you can think back that far, your population has grown by 1.5 million. It's projected to grow by another 3 million roughly by about 2060. And the reality of the situation is if they're going to keep shoehorning more people into Sydney through immigration, let's face it, you're going to have people living in smaller lots further away from the city in far-flung areas. And you're also going to have more people living in high-rise shoeboxes. That's just the reality of it. This is really an immigration story. If Sydney continues to grow so aggressively, you're going to need to squeeze them somewhere into the existing urban footprint or expansion on the fringe. And in order to fit all these extra people in, means you're going to be living in smaller homes or high-rises. It's as simple as that.
And the interesting thing there is, I know there are exceptions. There are plenty of migrants who would be quite happy to live in similar buildings to what they might be used to back in their country of origin. But there are also many people who come here for the backyard, for the Australian dream, as we used to call it. And there have been in some of these stories, in fact, recently migrated families saying exactly that. So there's a bit of a conflict, isn't there?
Yeah, there is, but it's inevitable. I mean, Sydney's population is projected to grow to over 8 million people. By 2060 odd, by around 8.5 million people. I live in Melbourne. We're projected to grow to around 9.5 million people. It's even worse. And Brisbane's projected to grow to nearly 5 million people. Well, that basically means if we're going to keep doing this, you're going to have to squeeze more people in, which means more apartments and more shoebox, postage stamp size lots on the fringe. And we've already seen this in Sydney. So in the last 20 years. 61% of Sydney's dwelling approvals have been the higher density, so it's apartments and townhouses, mostly apartments. So, Sydney's dwelling composition has changed before our very eyes this century, whereby, the majority of the stock's gone from detached houses. Now detached houses are making up just, around about half, whereas at the start of the century they were well over half. And according to these Urban Task Force projections, by 2057, only the very richest people will be able to live in a detached house, because only 25% of Sydney's dwellings will be detached houses. The rest will be apartments and townhouses.
Sorry, mate, big picture question, and I know I'm not the only commentator who thinks this way, but I certainly have been saying it on this network for years now. Decentralisation, pushing people, particularly migrants, to regional areas, providing we can set up a place where they can work, of course, and flourish, but that would certainly help alleviate the problem and give people more opportunity to have a backyard, would it not?
Oh, absolutely it would. But yeah, again, it gets down to, is there industry there? So I'm only for, running strong immigration if there's a purpose to it. Back in the post-war era, we imported a lot of people because we had a tiny population. Obviously, there was the defence issues, that sort of thing. We did need to grow, but we also built industries around them. So we built, entire manufacturing base, industries like that. We don't do that nowadays. We've gutted our manufacturing, and now we just import people to basically work in cafes and service industries and this sort of thing. And the overwhelming majority of them live in the capital cities. And there is another problem here, Bill. Australia is very short of water, and we're especially short of water in rural areas. And that's why everyone lives, very close to the coast. And we saw only 5 years ago, Sydney's water supplies hit critical low levels. If we keep growing the population like a science experiment, those water pressures are going to just get worse and worse. So when the next drought hits, where is Sydney's water going to come from?
There is pressure, though, and look, I agree with you, Leith, on the whole population growth thing. But Urban Task Force CEO, and bear in mind, Urban Task Force represents property developers and equity financiers. Tom Forrest, the CEO, says we need strong immigration to boost the economy. I hear that a lot, but there are other factors that are come at a big cost to that, aren't there?
Yeah. Well, look. Certainly, immigration boosts the economy if you look at it in aggregate. So, Australia's economy's avoided recession just because of immigration, but per capita, and that's what matters, per person, our living standards are declining. So what's the point? And, Urban Task Force is talking its own book. It's a development lobby. It always wants more growth. It doesn't care what the negative impacts of that growth is, whereas I care about the negative impacts on Australians, and I stand up for Australians. I don't stand up for development lobbies, big business, that sort of thing. And, those sorts of groups always push for more immigration because basically it's profitable for them. It makes them more money, but I don't care about that sort of stuff. I care about living standards. I care about where my children are going to live and where my grandchildren are going to live.
Exactly. It's feeding the machine. And as I mentioned earlier, it's actually contradictory to why most people come to this country. If you take away that quality of life, why would anyone want to come and live here? That's the balance we've got to achieve. Leith, it's been great to catch up again, mate. And I know you're a regular guest on Luke's weekend program here. So thank you. And we look forward to hearing you, if not before, next weekend.
Yeah, cheers, Bill. Anytime.
Polestar 4